A German shepherd did something so extraordinary that it left an entire town speechless. For 97 days straight, through freezing rain, scorching heat, and snowstorms, this dog refused to leave his owner's grave. He wouldn't eat, wouldn't drink, wouldn't move, even when veterinarians said he had just hours to live. But what happened on day 98 will shatter your heart and rebuild it again. This story will change how you see the bond between humans and animals forever. Make sure you're subscribed, because what this stranger did next proves that some connections transcend death itself. The morning air carries the weight of grief through Riverside Cemetery, where dewdrops cling to weathered headstones like tears that refuse to fall. It's been 3 days since Harold Peterson's funeral, and the Illinois spring feels unusually cold, as if nature itself mourns the loss of the gentle veteran who walked these grounds every evening with his faithful companion. Max lies motionless on the freshly turned earth, his golden coat now dulled with mud and exhaustion. His powerful frame, once vibrant with the energy of a dog half his age, seems diminished against the backdrop of granite and marble. The German shepherd's dark eyes remain fixed on Harold's headstone, where the inscription reads simply, "Harold Peterson, 1942-2024. Beloved father, veteran, friend." But to Max, those words mean nothing. What matters is the scent that still lingers here. Faint traces of Old Spice aftershave mixed with the familiar musk of worn leather gloves. Dr. Patricia Williams, a veterinary behaviorist from the University of Illinois, explains the phenomenon that has captivated local news crews gathering at the cemetery gates. What we're witnessing with Max is called complicated grief in animals, she says, her voice heavy with professional concern. Dogs form attachments through scent, routine, and emotional bonding that can be even stronger than human relationships. When that bond is severed abruptly, some dogs experience what we can only describe as depression, a complete shutdown of normal survival instincts. The science behind Max's vigil reveals the depth of his anguish. Canines possess up to 300 million olfactory receptors compared to humans' 6 million, meaning every breath Max takes floods his brain with memories of Harold. The cemetery soil holds traces of his master's presence from their countless evening walks, creating an invisible map of love that only Max can read. Maria Santos discovered Max on that first morning, curled against the headstone, as if trying to absorb warmth from cold granite. At 53, Maria has tended these grounds since she was barely out of high school, raking leaves in autumn, planting flowers in spring, and offering quiet comfort to the grieving families who visit. She's seen her share of mourners, but never one with 4 legs and a broken heart. "I brought him fresh water and some of my lunch meat," Maria recalls, her weathered hands gesturing toward the untouched bowl that still sits beside Harold's grave. "He looked at me with those eyes, not angry, not afraid, just empty, like someone had taken all the light out of him." She tried everything she could think of, whistling softly, clicking her tongue, even playing recordings of Harold's voice that his son David had provided. Nothing worked. David Peterson made the 4-hour drive from Chicago 3 times in those first few days, each visit more desperate than the last. At 45, he carries his father's stubborn determination but lacks Harold's gentle touch with animals. "Dad always said Max wasn't just a dog. He was his battle buddy," David explains, his voice cracking slightly. After Mom died 12 years ago, Max became Dad's whole world. They had this routine, this language between them that I never really understood. The routine David describes was sacred to both Harold and Max. Every morning at 6:30, Harold would whisper, "Rise and shine, soldier," while Max stretched beside the bed. Breakfast was shared. Harold's black coffee and toast, Max's kibble with a spoonful of Harold's scrambled eggs. Their evening walks through Riverside Cemetery weren't morbid rituals, but celebrations of life, Harold stopping to read names aloud, while Max sniffed at familiar markers. Dr. Williams notes that this routine created what behaviorists call environmental anchoring, Max's entire identity became intertwined with Harold's presence and their shared rituals. When we remove that anchor suddenly, she explains, some dogs lose their sense of self entirely. They're not just grieving, they're existentially lost. The failed rescue attempts reveal the depth of Max's commitment to his vigil. On day 2, Animal Control Officer Rebecca Martinez tried using a slip lead, but Max's strength, normally channeled into playful wrestling matches with Harold, became immovable resistance. It was like trying to move a statue, she recalls. He didn't growl or snap, just went completely limp. 90 pounds of dead weight that I couldn't budge without hurting him. Local dog trainer Jim Hoffman arrived on day 3 with treats, toys, and 30 years of experience. He attempted what he calls positive redirection, creating new associations to break Max's fixation on the gravesite. The German Shepherd showed no interest in tennis balls that once sent him bounding across Harold's backyard. No response to the squeaky toys that used to drive him wild with excitement. But something changes on the 4th night. Cemetery security guard Tony Walsh notices a figure approaching through the darkness. Someone moving with purpose toward Harold's grave, where Max maintains his silent vigil. The stranger stops just beyond Tony's flashlight beam, watching the grieving dog for nearly an hour before disappearing into the shadows between the towering oak trees. I've worked nights here for 8 years, Tony reports, and I know every regular visitor, every maintenance worker, every family member who comes to pay respects. This person was different. They moved like they belonged here, like they knew exactly where they were going. The mystery deepens when Maria arrives the next morning to find fresh water in Max's bowl and a worn military blanket draped carefully across his shoulders. The blanket carries scents that make Max lift his head for the first time in days. Not Harold's familiar smell, but something connected. Something from the same world of shared sacrifice and brotherhood that defined Harold's generation. The temperature drops that evening as storm clouds gather over Riverside Cemetery. Max shivers beneath the military blanket, his breath forming small clouds in the cooling air. Somewhere in the darkness, beyond the headstones, the mysterious visitor watches and waits, carrying secrets that could change everything about Max's lonely vigil. As rain begins to fall, washing away the scent trails that have kept Max anchored to this spot, something shifts in the air. A promise that this night will be different, that help is coming from an unexpected source, and that the bond between a soldier and his battle buddy might be stronger than death itself. 12 days pass, and Max's body begins to betray him. His powerful frame, once capable of leaping 6-foot fences during his playful years with Harold, now struggles to lift his head from the cold earth. Each rib shows through his matted coat, like the bars of a prison made from his own grief. The German Shepherd, who once devoured his meals with enthusiasm, now turns away from Harold's favorite beef jerky treats that Maria places hopefully beside the headstone each morning. Dr. Patricia Williams returns to assess Max's condition, her professional composure cracking as she kneels beside the deteriorating dog. In 30 years of veterinary practice, I've never encountered a case this severe, she admits, her voice barely above a whisper. Max's cortisol levels are off the charts. His body is literally consuming itself from the stress of separation anxiety. Without intervention, we're looking at organ failure within days, not weeks. The local news discovers Max's story on day 15, and suddenly Riverside Cemetery becomes a pilgrimage site for animal lovers across 3 states. Cars line the narrow cemetery roads, families arriving with flowers, treats, and smartphones ready to capture the heartbreaking scene. Children press their faces against the cemetery fence, asking their parents why the doggy won't eat the cookies they brought. But Max remains oblivious to the growing crowd. His world shrunk to the 3-foot patch of earth, where Harold's scent still lingers in the soil. The attention brings unwanted complications. PETA activists arrive with signs demanding Max's immediate rescue, while other groups argue that forcing him to leave violates his right to grieve naturally. The cemetery board holds emergency meetings as visitor traffic threatens to damage other graves and disrupts funeral services. Revenue from flower sales increases dramatically, but so do complaints from families who can't find parking for their own visits to deceased loved ones. Maria finds herself caught in the middle, fielding hundreds of phone calls from reporters, animal psychics, and self-proclaimed dog whisperers offering miracle cures. Everyone thinks they have the answer, she explains, exhaustion clear in her voice. But they don't see Max at 4 in the morning when the cameras are gone and he's whimpering Harold's names so quietly you can barely hear it. They don't understand that this isn't about food or shelter. This is about a soul that's been cut in half. David Peterson drives down from Chicago every weekend now, each visit more desperate than the last. He sits beside Max for hours, reading aloud from Harold's old letters home from Vietnam, hoping some familiar words might penetrate the fog of grief. Dad always said Max understood more English than most people, David shares, his own weight loss evident after weeks of sleepless nights. But it's like he's choosing not to hear me, like acknowledging anything means accepting that Dad is really gone. The first major crisis arrives on day 45 when a brutal winter storm sweeps across Illinois, bringing temperatures that plummet to 10 below zero. Max's breath creates small clouds of vapor that dissipate quickly in the bitter air, and ice crystals form in his fur despite the military blanket that still covers his shoulders. Snow accumulates around his motionless form until he resembles a canine sculpture carved from grief and determination. Animal Control Supervisor Rebecca Martinez receives calls every hour demanding immediate action. The law requires her to remove animals in immediate danger, but approaching Max has become increasingly dangerous. The gentle dog, who once welcomed strangers with tail wags, now shows his teeth whenever uniformed officers come within 20 feet of Harold's grave. It's not aggression in the traditional sense, Martinez explains to frustrated city officials. It's protection. He's guarding what he sees as Harold's final resting place, and he'll fight anyone who tries to separate them. Dr. Sarah Chen, the emergency veterinarian called in to assess Max's critical condition, discovers alarming changes during her examination from a distance. His gums have turned pale, indicating possible anemia from malnutrition. His coat has lost its natural oils, and patches of skin show through where he's scratched obsessively at phantom irritations, classic signs of severe depression in canines. Most concerning is his breathing pattern, which has become shallow and irregular. Max's body is entering what we call failure to thrive. Dr. Chen explains to David during a tearful phone consultation. His immune system is compromised, his muscle mass is deteriorating rapidly, and his organ function is declining. Without aggressive intervention, including forced feeding and possible sedation for transport to intensive care, we're looking at a matter of days before his body simply gives up. The decision tears David apart. Every animal behaviorist consulted agrees that physically removing Max from the gravesite would likely cause additional trauma that could prove fatal in his weakened state. Yet leaving him means watching Harold's beloved companion slowly die from a broken heart. The parallel to his father's own final weeks, alone, refusing help, determined to stay in the home where his wife's memory lived, becomes painfully clear. Day 89 arrives with deceptive spring warmth that melts the snow around Harold's headstone. Max lies motionless in the muddy earth, his breathing so shallow that Maria checks repeatedly to ensure he's still alive. His once bright eyes have dulled to the color of storm clouds, and his body temperature has dropped dangerously low despite the mild weather. Dr. Chen's final examination reveals what everyone fears. Max's vital signs indicate complete systemic shutdown. "I estimate less than 48 hours, she tells David quietly, her professional training warring with her personal anguish. His kidneys are failing, his heart rate is erratic, and he's showing signs of neurological decline. At this point, the kindest thing might be to let him choose his own ending. David makes the heartbreaking decision to honor Max's vigil, understanding finally that some bonds transcend human logic or medical intervention. He arranges to spend the night beside Harold's grave, keeping watch over the dog who loved his father more than life itself. But as evening approaches, Maria notices something that changes everything. The mysterious figure she's glimpsed for weeks emerges from the shadows between the oak trees, an elderly man in a worn military jacket who moves with the careful precision of someone accustomed to reveille formations and final salutes. Tonight, instead of maintaining his usual distance, he walks directly toward Harold's grave, where Max lies dying, carrying something that glints in the fading light and secrets that could save them all. Day 97 arrives with the weight of finality hanging in the air like morning fog. Max's breathing has become so shallow that Maria places her hand near his muzzle every few minutes to confirm life still flickers within his failing body. His heartbeat, once strong enough to feel through his chest during Harold's bedtime rituals, now stutters with irregular patterns that make Dr. Chen shake her head gravely. The German Shepherd's eyes remain closed for longer periods, opening only briefly to stare at Harold's headstone before surrendering again to exhaustion. The scent of approaching rain mingles with the earthy smell of turned soil and dying flowers as Maria makes a decision that will change everything. She has watched this mysterious stranger maintain his nightly vigil for months, always appearing at exactly 11 p.m., always keeping his distance, always disappearing into the darkness after exactly 1 hour. Tonight, desperation overrides her natural hesitancy to intrude on private grief. The cemetery gates creak softly as she positions herself in the shadows, her heart pounding with the weight of Max's life hanging in the balance. When the familiar figure emerges from the tree line, moving with the measured gait of someone carrying decades of military discipline in his bones, Maria steps forward on trembling legs. The man stops abruptly, his weathered face showing surprise at being discovered after so many nights of solitary observation. Frank Williams stands before her, 78 years old with silver hair cropped in the same regulation style he's worn since 1968. His worn military jacket bears faded patches from the 173rd Airborne Brigade, and his hands shake slightly with a tremor that could be age or emotion. The guilt radiating from his entire being is palpable as he explains his connection to Harold in a voice rough with unshed tears and cigarettes given up too late. 50 years of Tuesday evening chess games, 50 years of shared memories from jungle foxholes and hometown bars, 50 years of friendship built on the unspoken understanding that some bonds survive any distance or silence. Harold had never mentioned feeling unwell during their weekly matches, never hinted that his heart was failing, never said goodbye. Frank discovered his best friend's death through a newspaper obituary 3 weeks after the funeral, 3 weeks too late to say the words that now burn in his throat like shrapnel. Every night for 97 days, Frank has driven the 23 miles from his own empty house to stand vigil over Harold's grave, paralyzed by the kind of survivor's guilt that only military men understand. He watches Max's deterioration with the helpless recognition of someone who has seen too many good soldiers die while lesser men lived. The dog's loyalty mirrors every promise Frank made to fallen comrades, every oath to never forget, every sleepless night wondering if he did enough. Maria's desperation cuts through his self-imposed isolation like a bayonet through darkness. Her words carry the sharp edge of ultimatum. If Harold meant anything to him, if their friendship had any meaning, if love exists beyond death, then Frank must act now, because Max is dying and time has run out for second chances and missed opportunities. Frank approaches Harold's grave with the reluctant steps of a man walking toward his own judgment. His worn combat boots make soft impressions in the muddy earth as Max lies motionless, his breathing so faint that Frank wonders if he's already too late. The night air carries the metallic smell of impending rain mixed with the familiar cemetery scents of wet stone and decaying flowers that remind Frank of too many military funerals in too many countries. Kneeling beside the headstone feels like assuming a position he's held 1,000 times before, beside wounded soldiers, beside fallen friends, beside the dying and the desperate. But talking to a dead man while a dying dog listens requires a different kind of courage than anything Frank learned in Vietnam. His voice emerges as barely more than a whisper, carrying the conversational tone of Tuesday evenings that stretched across decades. The chess set reference comes naturally because that's how Harold would want to be remembered. Not as a corpse in the ground, but as a stubborn competitor who always claimed the next game would settle their eternal rivalry. Frank's words create a bridge between past and present, between memory and reality, between a dead soldier and his living battle buddy who happens to have 4 legs and a broken heart. Then Frank remembers Harold's most frequent complaint during their weekly visits, how Max would interrupt their games by nudging Harold's arm whenever thunder rumbled outside or strangers approached the house. Harold would pause their match, place his hand on Max's head, and whisper those same words that became both command and comfort. "Good boy. Stay with me." The phrase carries the weight of 7 years of bedtime rituals, thunderstorm comfort, and unconditional love. It reaches into Max's consciousness like a key turning in a lock that's been rusted shut by grief. His ears twitch with the first sign of external awareness he's shown in weeks, and his eyes open to focus on Frank's face for the first time. Frank continues speaking, sharing secrets Harold whispered during chess games when bourbon loosened his tongue and nostalgia softened his soldier's heart. How Max had saved him from the crushing loneliness after his wife's death. How the dog's presence made an empty house feel like home again. How unconditional love had taught a 75-year-old widower that his heart could still expand rather than just break. The promise kept to a dying friend spills from Frank's lips. The oath to ensure Max knew he was loved, cherished, and remembered. These words penetrate Max's fog of grief because they carry Harold's essence, his vocabulary, his deepest truths, spoken in the familiar cadence of Tuesday evening conversations that shaped both men's twilight years. Max lifts his head completely for the first time in 97 days, his dark eyes focusing on Frank's weathered face with recognition that transcends species and circumstance. The movement is slight, barely perceptible, but it represents a seismic shift in the gravitational pull of grief that has held him motionless for over 3 months. His tail moves, not the enthusiastic wagging of happier times, not the full-body celebration Harold once inspired, but a barely visible acknowledgement that something has changed, someone has reached him, and perhaps survival might be possible after all. The movement lasts only seconds, but it breaks 97 days of absolute stillness and opens a door that everyone thought grief had welded shut forever. The thermos of vegetable soup that Frank has carried to the cemetery every night for nearly 100 days was meant for his own dinner during the long vigil. But as dawn breaks over Harold's grave, Frank unscrews the metal cap with trembling fingers and offers the warm broth to Max with the gentle patience of someone who understands that healing happens in small, sacred moments. The German shepherd's nose twitches at the familiar scent. The same Campbell's soup Harold used to share with him during sick days and winter evenings when comfort mattered more than proper dog nutrition. Max's tongue touches the liquid hesitantly, his body's survival instincts finally overriding the grief that has consumed him for over 3 months. The warm broth slides down his throat, carrying not just nutrients, but the taste of hope, and the possibility that life might continue beyond the boundaries of Harold's grave. Frank's weathered hand strokes Max's matted fur with the reverence of someone touching a miracle, understanding that this moment represents more than feeding. It's resurrection. Throughout that first night, Frank talks continuously to both Harold and Max, his voice weaving stories that span decades of friendship and war-forged brotherhood. He describes Harold's infamous card-counting incident in Saigon that nearly got them both court-martialed. The Christmas Eve firefight, where Harold saved 3 wounded soldiers while humming White Christmas, and the promise they made to each other that whoever died first would somehow let the other know he was okay. Max listens with ears that gradually perk forward, his body slowly remembering what it feels like to engage with the living world. When morning light filters through the oak trees surrounding Riverside Cemetery, Max performs an act that defies every expectation established over the past 97 days. He stands on legs that shake from muscle atrophy and malnutrition, walks the 3 steps to where Frank sits cross-legged beside Harold's headstone, and gently places his massive head in the old soldier's lap. The gesture carries the weight of absolute trust and recognition. The same comfort Max offered Harold during countless nights when Vietnam nightmares interrupted sleep and only unconditional love could chase away the demons. Frank's decision emerges from a place deeper than logic or convenience. At 78, he has lived alone for 2 decades, his own children grown and scattered across different states, his house echoing with the silence that accumulates when no one witnesses your daily routines or cares if you skip meals or forget to take medications. When he asks David Peterson for permission to adopt Max, the words carry the weight of understanding that loneliness kills more veterans than combat ever did. The transition unfolds gradually over the following months. Max's physical recovery requires patience and veterinary care, specialized nutrition to rebuild his strength, medication for the stress-related digestive issues that develop during his vigil, and gradual exercise to restore muscle tone. But the emotional healing proves more complex and beautiful. Frank discovers that caring for Harold's beloved companion provides purpose that retirement had stolen from his days, and meaning that 40 years of solitary evening meals had erased from his existence. Their Tuesday routine develops organically, rooted in the chess games that defined Frank and Harold's friendship for half a century. Every week, Frank and Max make the familiar drive to Riverside Cemetery, where they sit beside Harold's grave for exactly 1 hour. Max rests his head against the headstone while Frank shares the mundane details of their week, grocery shopping adventures, Max's improvement with basic commands, the way Max still searches for Harold's scent in corners of Frank's house where his friend never actually visited. The cemetery grounds crew notices the transformation in both man and dog. Max's coat regains its golden luster, his eyes brighten with curiosity about squirrels and passing joggers, and his tail wags with increasing frequency. Frank stands straighter, his step becomes steadier, and his conversations with Maria Santos shift from desperate updates about Max's decline to proud reports of small victories and shared discoveries. The local news follows up on their story 6 months later, capturing Frank teaching Max to play a modified version of chess, where the dog learns to retrieve specific pieces on command. The segment goes viral, generating thousands of comments from viewers sharing their own stories of pets who saved them from isolation, depression, and despair. But Frank and Max remain largely oblivious to their internet fame, focused instead on the daily rhythms that have replaced grief with purpose. The diagnosis arrives on a Tuesday morning in November, delivered with the clinical precision that medical professionals use to soften devastating news. Early-stage dementia, the doctor explains, with progression rates that vary widely depending on lifestyle factors, social engagement, and cognitive stimulation. Frank receives the news with the same stoic acceptance he brought to combat briefings 50 years earlier. But his first thought focuses entirely on Max's welfare and the fear of abandoning another creature who has already survived too much loss. The irony reveals itself gradually as Frank's memory begins to fade in small, frustrating increments. Max assumes a new role with the intuitive wisdom that military working dogs displayed in Vietnam when they sensed danger before human senses could detect threats. The German Shepherd learns to guide Frank home when familiar neighborhoods become confusing mazes, to alert neighbors when Frank forgets to eat meals or take medications, and to provide the steady, reassuring presence that prevents panic during moments when present reality slips away like smoke. Their relationship evolves into a beautiful reciprocity where caregiver and patient roles shift seamlessly based on daily needs and circumstances. Some days, Frank leads their walks with confident steps and clear memories, sharing detailed stories about Harold's pranks and heroics. Other days, Max becomes the guide, gently redirecting Frank's wandering steps toward home and safety with the patient devotion that Harold would recognize and approve. Riverside Cemetery honors their story with a simple granite bench positioned within sight of Harold's grave. The plaque reads, "In memory of unconditional love, Harold, Max, and the stranger who reminded us that family isn't always blood." Visitors often find Frank and Max there on Tuesday afternoons, the old soldier's hand resting on the dog's head, while both gaze toward the headstone that brought them together and taught them that love survives death, transcends species, and creates families from the most unexpected circumstances. The bench becomes a pilgrimage site for people grieving their own losses, seeking proof that loyalty endures and that broken hearts can heal without forgetting. Max greets these visitors with the gentle wisdom of a therapy dog who understands suffering, while Frank shares Harold's story with anyone willing to listen, ensuring that his friend's memory lives on through countless retelling and the living example of love that refuses to surrender to death. Max's 97-day vigil reminds us that grief isn't a flaw, it's love with nowhere to go. Healing came not through rescue, but through presence. Frank didn't save Max, and Max didn't fix Frank. They simply showed up for each other when it mattered most. Harold's love lives on in Frank's quiet care, in Tuesday visits, in Max's loyal eyes guiding a fading mind. Sometimes love just needs a place to land. Look around, someone near you needs what Max gave: quiet loyalty, unexpected grace. If this story moved you, share it, and tell us, when did a stranger's kindness change your life?